Oh, there it was. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent last hour on Squawk. The White House keeping up the pressure on Fed Chair Powell, but in a very convivial way, I think, including this morning, with one advisor penning an op-ed that goes as far as to say that Powell could be the worst Fed chair in history. I question the hyperbole, Carl, but you never know. Because joining us now to explain as well as share the latest on trade talks, Senior Counsel for Trade and Manufacturing, always a strong voice for the President, Peter Navarro. All right, Peter, I'm going to give you the floor.
Great pleasure to be with you, Jim.
Thank
Great pleasure to be with you, buddy.
And the same, and you know that. And I feel that way. I read your piece. I said, okay, here's a person that has strong conviction on Fed Chair Powell, and I'm going to give you the floor to describe your view.
Yeah, well, let's start with what the stakes are. If he's too high at the Fed, let's say it's like a half point now too high. That's like anywhere from a quarter to a half a point of GDP growth that we're going to lose. In other words, we're going to grow more slowly. It's like $100 billion that costs our economy. And then when you trickle it down to the interest rates that people pay, that's about $100 billion in added debt because we're refinancing debt. So it's not small potatoes. Now, in terms of the argument, let's see if we can agree on two things, right? I claim in the Hill piece that Powell has made three major blunders. Let's see, Jim, if we can agree on the first two. When we were in the first term with President Donald Trump and we had the tariffs and the tax bills and the whole Trump-nomics going on, Powell raised rates too high. And by the Fed's own analysis, that cost us a lot of growth. So let's see if we can agree on that. And then when he was serving the Biden regime so well in a partisan way, in my judgment, he didn't raise rates fast enough. He let them get out of control. He also kept his mouth shut while the Democrat Congress was passing these massive expenditure inflationary bills. And he was too late Powell then. He was too early Powell in the first term. Can we agree, Jim, that those blunders happened? Is there any doubt that Powell was wrong twice in the earlier years?
I'm going to say no. I think there's a lot of time in between that he did things right. I totally agree on 2018. Was very against that. When it comes to what happened in terms of transitory or not, what I think it was an honest mistake. I will not give you that it was partisan. I will just say it's an honest mistake. But I think you,
but it
as
was
you
a
said,
mistake.
in my judgment.
But it
you
was
said
a
in
mistake.
my judgment.
Okay.
Yes.
So he's made two big mistakes so far, and now the third one is the question is, Jim, which isn't it? It's like rates should be lower. The markets are telling us all of that. Powell is doing the same thing he did with the first term of Donald Trump. He doesn't understand Trump-nomics. He doesn't understand the supply side aspects of tax cuts and deregulation. He doesn't understand the importance of strategic energy dominance and the president's ability to dramatically lower oil prices. And he doesn't have a clue about tariffs because in the first term, very clearly, we raised tariffs and there was no inflation. Most of the tariffs got eaten by the foreign countries as we expected.
Well,
the same
Peter,
thing's happening again.
These are not similar
So why is
tariffs.
he waiting?
These are much bigger tariffs. We know that. We have
seen absolutely no pass-through of tariffs. It's just not in the data, Jim. And by the way, what's wrong with a more flexible Fed? Why not lower rates and see what happens? What's the big deal?
Because from September through December of last year, they cut rates 4 times, and the long rates went up dramatically, hurting the mortgage rates. We don't want that to happen.
Well, that happened. Okay. Why did he cut rates? He was trying to get Biden or Harris elected. Come on.
Well, we want to
Come on. That's the partisan aspect of this. And by the way, I mean, look, whether he's let's look at the history. I think the Hill piece is interesting because I go back, talk about how Arthur Burns helped Nixon get elected with easy money. I talked about how Greenspan, and you and I were there, we were in the trenches when he raised rates and killed off the dot-com boom, and we had all that. That was a mistake. We saw Bernanke slow to understand systemic risk, and he let something which could have been manageable get out of control. And look, Jim, there's no question that this stagflation that emerged during the Biden years was not just the product of the Democrats. See the picture behind me, that Capitol Hill, where all that bad stuff happened, the Inflation Reduction Act and all of that. That only happens, Jim, if the Fed accommodates that. You go back to William McChesney Martin. I think McChesney Martin and Volcker are the two best Fed chairs. McChesney Martin, when Lyndon Johnson was prosecuting the Vietnam War and wouldn't trade off guns for butter, he said, no, I'm taking away the punch bowl. That's not going to happen. Powell could have spoken up. He should have seen the inflation that just quickly got out of control that we're now tamping back down. So I'm just saying, Jim, he's a lawyer, not an economist, which is an anomaly. The two worst Fed chairs we've had in recent memory were G. William Miller, who was also a lawyer, and now Powell. So I think the case against him, and I would say where Scott Besson, the little clip you played, it's like, remember, Powell is just part of the board, right? And so I'm in some sense appealing to the board. It's like, come on, let's get with the program.
I want to let Carl in, Peter, because I think you've made your point. I think you made your point of where you feel. I disagree with the ranking, but Carl, there are other issues.
Peter, while we do have you, I've always wanted to ask you for the last 90 days about your comment on April 7th when you said 90 deals were possible in 90 days. We're almost up, and I just wonder, was your thinking at the time that it really was an aspirational number, or are you kind of disappointed in two for now?
I'm happy with the progress we've had because every country that we run a major deficit with is fully engaged. I think what we're learning from the negotiations is simply, Carl, how difficult it is for these countries to give up the advantage they have over us. And so therein lies the tale. I think the negotiations are proceeding well. And by the way, the tariff revenues are coming in and really helping this country. And we're able now to get trillions of dollars of investment here to build up our factories and jobs. The tariff revenues are coming in, which help pay for the big, beautiful bill. And I'm very pleased with the direction we're going. We've got Howard Lutnick, Jameson Greer, Scott Besson all engaged in these deals, and the president, of course, at the top of this.
They're your team. Now, I want to go back just for a second. Why, if you're Jay Powell, why not wait to see a couple quarters if there is inflation? What's that going to do to the economy? You've got an incredibly strong economy, Peter. It's remarkable.
So we've already had that argument. We've waited like 2 quarters. As Scott Besson said, we're behind.
Hear me out. Employment's terrific.
You asked me a direct question. I'm going to give you the answer.
Fair enough.
The answer is simple.
Fair enough.
A 50 basis point lag. If we're up 50 basis points too high, that's a ton of money. That's going to be a half a point of GDP growth slower than we otherwise could and should be. And remember, when you have slower growth, Jim, you have less tax revenues and more debt and deficit, and then you got to finance the whole thing. All these synergies that work with the Trumpnomics, Powell is not allowing to happen, and that's the tragedy here. So he's costing homeowners on their mortgages. He's costing Americans with their credit card debt. He's costing us in terms of our national debt growing. So there's a real opportunity cost for him.
We're not going to disagree. There are some opportunity costs.
This.
But now I do want to know, as the trade person, I've not seen you lately for trade. We've got some things that disturb me. You have a great American company that arguably has put 2.9 million people to work in our country, which is Apple. It seems like no matter where Apple goes, we find that they have to be taxed high. And I know that they're committing $550 billion to the country, and unless you directly contest Tim Cook's honor, what is enough for you?
Apple, look, Jim, going back to the first Trump term, Tim Cook has continually asked for more time in order to move his factories out of China. I mean, it's the longest running soap opera in Silicon Valley. And my problem with Tim Cook is he never takes the steps to actually do that. And with all these new advanced manufacturing techniques and the way things are moving with AI and things like that, it's inconceivable to me that Tim Cook could not produce his iPhones elsewhere around the world and in this country.
But India
so
was something you wanted
come on,
at
it's
one
a
point.
technological
You wanted
problem.
India. You wanted Vietnam. Suddenly, these are not easy decisions. You wanted us to leave China. Apple is trying very hard. They're a huge manufacturer. How about something like this? Apple's a great company, and they're our gem of our country. And what we're going to do is we're going to respect that they moved to India. When it comes to us, we sure wish they would do more, but they're doing $550 billion away from that. What more do we need from this great American company?
Jim, let's simulate that. You and I cannot solve Apple's problems today on this show. What I'm really concerned about is what's going on with the Federal Reserve today.
All right. Well, I did want to ask one more thing. We have to see Elon Musk. Obviously, he lost some things in the big bad bill. He has not been as complimentary of you. I know you too long to repeat the things that he said because I don't like that level of discourse, but obviously you must have a feeling about someone who does not think that you're as intelligent as I've known you for many years and has really, I think, used that kind of derision that I find to be not part of the discourse. What do you say back to him?
Well, here's what I would say about Elon in terms of the big, beautiful bill, which is, I think, where the discourse should stay focused on. If you look at the analytics of this Congressional Budget Office, where they come up with a $2 trillion increase in the debt, it's the same kind of mistake they make that Jay Powell made in the first term. It's like when they scored the bill in 2018, they scored it wrong. They were a point off in GDP growth, and we got all sorts of revenues instead. So when you accurately score the bill, the big, beautiful bill, you get another point of GDP growth, which is a couple of $1 trillion, so the debt comes down. And then when you accurately score the tariff revenues, you get another couple of $1 trillion, and you move from a $5 trillion, it's a $5 trillion thing. You go from a $2 to $3 trillion deficit to a $2 to $3 trillion surplus. And it boggles my mind, Jim, that not enough people are talking about that in the legacy media. Because that's the numbers.
What should not boggle my mind is that people should listen to you and realize that you did not come back with some sort of gratuitous, capricious statement about Elon Musk, and I applaud you. You are the scholar and gentleman that I've known for 50 years. Thank you so much to Peter Navarro.
Always a pleasure to be with you and Carl.
Thank you.